behind me is the main building of Russia's Federal Security Service, that massive yellow brick building known as Lubyanka, that used to be, by the way, the headquarters of the Soviet KGB as well. An old, significant and very symbolic building. Just to give you an understanding of how central we are, just a 15-minute walk down that road will take you directly to the Red Square and the Kremlin. So we are literally in the very heart of Russia's capital, and this is where the shooting happened earlier on Thursday around 6 p.m. Details are still not clear, but what has been already confirmed: one FSB officer at least has been killed. 2 others are right now in critical condition, and they are being treated at one of Moscow hospitals right now. And we hear from Russia's authorities that there was just one person behind the attack, and he was killed in the operation, not 3 people like we heard from initial reports. And also there was an information that Russian authorities classified what happened as terror attack, but right now there is no confirmation of these reports. So downtown Moscow, Thursday evening, of course it is very crowded, and there were many people here at the time when the first gunshots were heard. And later many of them shared their emotions and feelings on social media, and many of them described the first seconds as a moment of confusion, because people couldn't understand exactly what that sound was, and many took it for fireworks. And they were laughing and joking until police officers told them to hide, and this is when panic started. Let's take a listen to what eyewitnesses have to say about what happened here.
When the shooting started, I was in the opposite building in a Starbucks cafe. I was just sitting there working at my laptop. The atmosphere was calm, Christmas music playing in the background, when I heard the sound of gunfire. It was the last thing I expected. At 5 or 10 minutes past 6, the gunfire began. And it was not just a few shots, it came in bursts. We saw officers taking cover behind the cars. So I spent an hour inside that cafe. The lights in there went out, and then we were led out of there through the back door.
As you can see behind me, there are many police cars and minibuses. I tried to count them. There are at least 15 of them. They cordoned off the area around Lubyanka building, 2 streets around that building right now cordoned off. But all in all, there is no panic here right now on the ground. So different now, 3 hours after the shooting happened here. And just a little bit more about the place where we are. Right here, there is a big building, also one of Moscow's biggest and oldest kids stores. Also, it was very crowded at 6 p.m. You can imagine many tourists and people coming from work, and it has been immediately closed after the first gunshots for security purposes, of course. Back to you.
Many thanks, Maria, for Nachrichte in central Moscow for us there. Let's keep the conversation in the studio now. Daniel Hawkins is with me. Just keeping across proceedings. I've said this before, but the picture changes. It becomes a little clearer as time passes by. A little bit more information coming with regards to the number of people involved in the attack, the number of people who've been killed or injured, and also how the authorities are dealing with it.
Well, that's right. The early reports indicated an incident of a slightly different scale, it has to be said. Early reports coming in of 3 attackers, of some of them potentially wearing military or police uniforms, of multiple automatic weapons. That has clarified now as time has gone on. Those were the early reports about 2.5 hours ago. They have confirmed now, the FSB, the Federal Security Service of Russia, that only one attacker was involved, and reports saying he has been neutralized. In terms of casualties as well, we weren't sure at the time how many of them were fatalities, how many were critically injured. We know now from their confirmation that at least one security officer was killed, another one in hospital in critical condition, and the Ministry of Health saying a total of 5 casualties have been treated at the scene, although we can't confirm if those security and police police officers were among those 5. So certainly the investigation part, now that this is no longer an active shoot or a live scene situation, will begin. Investigators obviously piecing together the timing of this attack, the target, the identity of the attacker, to try and really get behind or see what was behind this attacker's motive, what was going through their head, and indeed if there were any others involved in the planning or organisation of this attack today in central Moscow.
And Russia has been a victim multiple times of terrorism. It's seen its fair share of atrocities. Even over the last decade, multiple major incidents, multiple fatalities. The death toll much smaller today, but it's just another reminder. Nobody's immune to it. No country is safe from terrorism. Indeed.
We have seen terror attacks in pretty much every developed capital. Some of them we've covered, of course, together in the studio. The attacks in Nice, the Paris, Bataclan, London Bridge, 2 attacks, in fact. Each using slightly different tactics, slightly different weapons, but of course the aim of all these attacks, if of course this is officially confirmed by security forces as terrorism, the aim of course is to spread panic, to spread fear and cause as many casualties as possible. It is worth saying in this case that this attacker had an automatic weapon. Had he chosen a different target, a Christmas market, a crowded tube or bus stop, a shopping centre, we would be talking slightly different casualty numbers. We would have been talking a different incident altogether. So perhaps that's something to take away from this attack, that whatever the motive of this perpetrator was, whatever was going through his head, he knew that he would get a swift response. He knew that it was unlikely he would leave this scene alive. That's something the investigators will be taking into account, certainly, when they are investigating what lay behind today's events.
OK, let's get some expert analysis now. We can speak to David Lowe, who is a terrorism expert and also a senior research fellow at Leeds Beckett University. Good evening to you, David.
Good evening.
The incident we're talking about, an assault on the National Security Service headquarters, the FSB building. Is it fair to say that, you know, this was always going to be a suicide mission? You would know the response you were going to get, and it was going to be heavy, which begs the question, why would someone target such a facility?
Well, you're quite right. I think anyone who would want to attack the FSB building or similar buildings, I mean, you were talking there before globally, there are similar buildings around the world in the capitals. You know, this is what we call a hard target, and that's what he's picked. And I think maybe one of the reasons, I'm speculating here, but let's see what comes out. But what it does say is there's the FSB. This is the Russian security service. It has a rich history. You know, as your reporter was saying earlier, you know, before that was the KGB in the days of the Soviet Union. So it's an iconic location. It's an iconic organization. And it's saying, basically, well, if the FSB aren't safe, you're certainly not safe. And I agree with your discussion there. So thankfully, they didn't go to like a Christmas market, or I can imagine Red Square would be very busy today with tourists and so on. Thankfully, they didn't go there. But I think that could be one of the reasons he picked the FSB, because of the message it gives.
And David, Daniel Hawkins here, a correspondent in the studio. We mentioned some of the previous attacks that have taken place around France, the UK, or Moscow as well. We are seeing an increase in frequency in such attacks around the world. Some of them may be copycat attacks or blowback, as another expert mentioned there. Why do you think these are becoming more common, and why choose this target?
Yeah, I think we have to look at the nature. I mean, you know, quite rightly, the Russian authorities are treating it as a terrorist attack, and there's a compatibility of law really between states. If you start with a terrorist attack, there's normally wider powers. You scale it right from the very top and during an investigation, and it's easier to do that if it works out in the end and it's not. Then you can scale down. It's hard to do it the other way. So I understand why they're treating it as a potential terrorist attack. Why are we seeing this? Well, let's have a look what's going on. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what the cause is with this individual. If they can find out what's inspired this individual to carry out the attack. Of course, Daesh or Islamic State, they've lost their territory, but they are still active in inspiring people. Their media output is still ongoing. They haven't gone away, so it could be that's inspiring. And don't forget, Daesh was the only, Russia was the only state that Daesh actually declared war on in 2014. I know there's an irony to it. So, Russia's never been immune from attacks from Daesh. And there have been issues around the Caucasus where you saw the likes of Daesh and that these extreme Islamists trying to inspire Muslims in the states around Chechnya, Dagestan, and so on to the cause, and that caused friction. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out from that. And as I said, why pick the FSB? Well, it's a hard target, and I said I'll reinforce that message. If he is a terrorist, he's gone and said, look, not even the FSB is safe.
Terrorism is certainly nothing new. One would think now, with the technology that the security services have, that there's never been greater scrutiny of the communications that we have between each other as members of the public, and that the greater security protocols are in place to try and prevent terrorist attacks, yet they continue to happen. Is this the message that we get, that there's no stopping them?
No, it's very difficult. I think if you talk to any head of any counter-terrorism police or any head of security, state security, they will tell you it's virtually impossible to stop everyone, especially if you have an individual, if they've not been on a system or they've not been assessed as a great risk, or they've been on a system where they're acting on their own initiative. It's very hard. But what we are seeing though, is making it very, very difficult for organised cells to operate. I mean, one example here in the UK was the Manchester bombing. Abedi did not work on his own. He had other individuals. And it's getting harder and harder for them to operate. And I know, not just in the UK, I know in other states, certainly around Europe, a number of plots have actually been prevented due to the work of the security service and counter-terrorism police, because they've got to communicate with each other. But you have an individual who is inspired by what they see online, my messages, and they're acting alone. They're very, very difficult to try and prevent those attacks.
And just in terms of policy here, obviously, Vladimir Putin, coincidence or not, this timing was at an event in the Kremlin marking the National Security Forces Day. That's going to take place tomorrow in Moscow, giving a speech. What sort of measures do you think can we expect to be brought in after an attack such as this?
Well, I think there'll mostly be, and we see it again globally, there might be a higher police presence in certain areas that have been identified as a potential risk. I mean, I mentioned Red Square before. You've got St. Basil's Cathedral, the Kremlin, and so on. All that are very popular. And you look at various locations around Moscow, well, maybe around Russia. I mean, if we go to St. Petersburg, there's plenty of iconic targets in St. Petersburg, and again, this will be busy as we're approaching Christmas, and there'll be tourists there, going to enjoy themselves, and obviously, naturally, citizens from each city enjoying themselves. So it may be looking at that and perhaps increase the physical presence, but also perhaps analysing again what intelligence data is there and see if they can make any links. And what may come out is looking at this individual, once they identify this individual, look at his premises, look at what he's been looking at online, there may be some links there, and we just don't know. That's the thing with the investigation. You've got to be open-minded about this and look at everything objectively.
We heard, it seems like it was a few months ago, Donald Trump was saying that Islamic State had been defeated, yet the terrorist attacks continue. They claim responsibility, including the recent one in London. We don't yet know if this will be confirmed terrorism and who's responsible, but given that the enemy supposedly, the politicians say, has been defeated, does that mean they've not been defeated really? They've just moved to a place where they're not so visible? Yeah,
I think that was to me, that was a big mistake to say Islamic State were defeated. OK, they've lost their self-proclaimed caliphate. They've lost control of key towns and cities that they had at their height by the time it's 2015, 2016. But they've not been defeated. I said earlier on that they're still there. They've still got a high media presence. Obviously, they've had to go to more deserted areas around Syria to operate, but they're also operating. They're trying to operate in Yemen. Wherever there's a power vacuum, they either have their own individuals or inspire other groups to follow their cause. So you can never say they've been defeated. It's like, say, here in the UK, we've had with Northern Ireland, we had the Troubles for 30 years. The Provisional IRA and Sinn Féin met the Loyalists at the negotiating table. And then we had the Omagh bombing as the Good Friday Agreement is signed, and the real IRA, as it was then, was formed. I could give other examples around the world where there is always a group that's always disaffected by any progress that the cause they are fighting for. They still think it's present. So you can never say they're totally defeated. Well, one thing about Islamist-inspired terrorism, there's a strong ideology towards this, a strong ideological link, and that hasn't gone away. So, I mean, for example, here in the UK, we dropped our threat level from severe to substantial. And all that meant was it went from highly likely to likely, and likely, as we saw with the London Bridge attack on the 29th of November. It happens, and that individual, you know, he was released from prison, but he had those connections, and quite clearly he was still imbued with that ideology. So we can't totally relax.
David, greatly appreciate your expertise and analysis. David Lowe is my guest. He's a terrorism expert and a senior research fellow at Leeds Beckett University. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Daniel Hawkins is in the studio with me, and we've been compiling information as it's been coming in, trying to get the best picture we can, the most accurate picture. What cannot be denied, though, is when you get immediate video footage from the scene, and it gives you even only a small sense of the sheer terror and panic that the people who were in that close vicinity experienced, not knowing if they were going to live or die and what was going on around them.
Yeah, absolutely. And as our correspondents got to the scene, Roma and Maria on different sides of that building, we saw very empty, very quiet, deserted streets around them, aside from the police and the cordons and assembled media. And that's such a strange sight. You know, at this time, towards the end of the week, 6, 7 p.m, Russia, Moscow, Lubyanka, you've got Sulma nearby the shopping centre, you've got bars and restaurants, you've got the Bolshoi. It really would have been packed at the time. And when that shooting did begin and people started filming on their phones, managed to get hold of some of the footage there, really showed the panic that ensued as people heard automatic gunfire in central Moscow. This is what managed to get hold of. Obviously, we mentioned before, we would have been talking an entirely different incident, entirely different casualty numbers had the target been different, had the target been a Christmas market, a school, a metro station, etc., as these targets often are. The Moscow metro bombing, the Petersburg metro bombing, etc., really would have been talking a different incident. And some of the witnesses, of course, though on scene, wouldn't have known that. They wouldn't have been aware of how many attackers there were. In reports coming in initially of 3 attackers, some of them dressed in uniforms, you know, people being shouted at to get down, to run, to hide in buildings. It's good to have the benefit of hindsight and 20/20 vision to say, OK, this could have been far worse. We could have been talking a dozen civilians being killed here. Of course, at the time, people don't know that. And as you quite rightly said, they wouldn't have known how long they have left to live. This is what eyewitnesses described at the scene of the incident.
I was sitting with my friends at a bar when the shooting began. It was the sound of a Kalashnikov assault rifle. I know what it sounds like. My friends were like, oh, it must be firecrackers. But I told them, no way, it's not firecrackers. And then we saw people running down the street. It was scary. First we saw people running, and then a SWAT team armed with assault rifles came running in the opposite direction. And then we heard massive gunfire. We don't know what exactly happened there. Officers asked us to stay away from the windows. Then they let us leave the bar after a few hours.
The thing that I cannot get out of my head at this moment was when you're talking about this close proximity, this attack was in close proximity to the most famous, the largest children's toy store in Moscow. What, just a few hundred metres down the road. The mind just... I'm filled with dread when I think what might have been. Thank goodness it wasn't. And it makes you realise how important it is to make the city centre as secure as it can be, and how almost impossible it seems that is. And we heard the President talking about the difficulties and the challenges in countering terrorism.
Yeah, indeed. And, of course, people are going to speculate about the timing. Media is going to speculate, indeed, about all the events taking place tonight. Of course, we still haven't had that official confirmation from the security service that this is a terrorist attack. We haven't even had official confirmation that the attacker has been killed. That has come from sources, from media reports. But maybe it's easy to speculate, but we can't say for sure what happened and that full timeline until we get official confirmation. But as you quite rightly said, timing-wise, this was the day of President Putin's annual press conference. That would have been receiving increased media attention. There would have been increased media in the centre. And of course, as you also mentioned earlier, they keep a very tight ship about the president's movements, about his diary. We can reveal he was in the Kremlin earlier this evening. He was marking an event on the eve of National Security Day in Russia, dedicated to members of the FSB, of other security forces as well, where he highlighted the importance of tackling extremism, of tackling terror in Russia, precisely to prevent incidents like this. This is what he had to say earlier today.
We need to be more active in countering extremism. It's necessary to firmly, uncompromisingly suppress provocations, calls for violence, attempts to draw people, especially youth, into antisocial, radical activity.
To sum things up, you've got 5 pages of notes here over the last 2 hours as events have taken place, reports coming in, flying from all over the place. What we can confirm at 9:20 Moscow time, there have been at least 5 injuries. That's been confirmed by the Ministry of Health. We can probably say 2 of those are security forces. One of them is in a critical condition. 1 traffic police officer and at least 1 FSB officer killed during that attack. Media reports coming in that the attacker was acting alone, that he had an automatic assault rifle and that he has now been shot dead by security forces. Still pending confirmation from them and still pending confirmation on the motives of this attack. That's obviously going to be established by investigators at the scene who've opened already a case into murder, attempted murder of police. Reports as well, they have been looking for some sort of explosive device in a suitcase left in the lobby of that building, hence the bomb squad, hence the fire engines, the MCS, the emergency ministry's vehicles on scene. That's all to be confirmed. The tube stops around have been opened, the roads remain closed, the cordon remains in place for forensics to do their work. We'll bring you the latest updates as they come in over the next few hours from those official sources.
OK, many thanks, Dan. Let's turn to our correspondent, Maria Finoshina, who's just across the road from where the attack occurred, the FSB building.
On the ground, and I can tell you that I can see 2 completely different scenes here. One is the one behind me, that massive building, the main building of Russia's Federal Security Service that used to be, by the way, the headquarters of famous Soviet KGB as well. The area around this building is right now cordoned off. There are many, at least 20, I tried to count them all, police cars here, minibuses, and the streets around this building are right now closed. But on the other side here, what you could not see behind our camera, there is ordinary life, I can say. People are coming back from work and entering metro. There is metro entrance right here. It's open right now. By the way, I came here using subway as well. It wasn't cordoned off at all, and there are many tourists. We just talked to one American couple. They couldn't understand why there are so many people here and so many cameras, so they didn't hear about the shooting. So 2 completely different worlds here. And on my right, there is a big building, one of Moscow's biggest and oldest kids stores. Right now, it is closed and has been closed since the beginning of the operation for security reasons. So completely different worlds here, and it is rather calm here, but it was different 3 hours ago, because this is where the shooting happened earlier on Thursday. And just to give you an understanding how central we are, just a 15-minute walk down this road that is also open right now will take us directly to the Red Square and to the Kremlin. So we are literally in the very heart of Moscow. And so the shooting happened, details are not yet clear, but whatever it was, it's clear that the attack on Federal Security Service headquarters, this legendary and symbolic building, was more than just an attack, but rather an attack on a state, if you know what I mean. So it's Moscow downtown Thursday evening. There were many people here at the time when the first gunshots were heard, and later many of them shared their feelings and their emotions, and many of them, I noticed, described the first seconds as confusion because people simply couldn't understand exactly what was going on, and many of them took the sounds of shooting for fireworks because it's Christmas time here, of course. So there was a moment of confusion, and many of them continued to laugh and drink and take their dinners until police officers told them to hide, and this is when panic started. Let's take a listen to what the eyewitnesses have to say.
At 6 p.m. I was leaving a store at Kuznetsky Bridge, and then those sounds began. At first people thought it was a firework, but the traffic police, who always stand there, understood the situation immediately. They started shouting not to stand and watch, but to run away. They warned people in a very efficient way. So they started running away from the scene despite all the emotions. I wanted to stay and film a bit, but then thought, what if it's a terrorist attack? What if some bullets ricochet? There were not 1, 2, or 3 shots, there were lots of them. So many that I can't even count. It all lasted for around a minute. When I left, the situation was still dangerous.
So it could become right now in central Moscow, but it is absolutely clear that these people, those who we just heard, they witnessed very, very dramatic moments. So details, as I just said, are not yet clear, but what is already confirmed, at least one FSB or Federal Security Service officer has been killed, and 2 others right now are in critical condition. We'll keep you updated.
Thank you to Maria Fanoshina in central Moscow for us with that report. Let's bring in guests now. Rainer Rotfuss is a geopolitical analyst and consultant. Joins me. Good evening to you, Rainer. We've spoken to some other guests, and they've suggested, you know, the attack on the federal, just outside the Federal Security Service building. I must add that the FSB themselves said that the building itself wasn't breached, but this was right outside their building. Other guests have said this is no accident, this is deliberate. You don't do this unless you're, I guess, effectively trying to send a message. Would you go along with that?
Of course. I mean, if we are dealing with a terror attack, the question always is, what is the message which was to be sent out by the attackers? And the fact that they have made their strike against the FSB headquarters is really alarming, because it shows that they are so self-confident that they believe, at least, to hit the Russian government.
When you're talking about someone reportedly with an automatic weapon, reports that it was a Kalashnikov, this could have a disaster on a much greater scale. That suggests, that, does it, that the FSB officers, who were obviously in close proximity, were very quick in response?
Yeah, indeed. This is what has to be seen, that the reaction was quick. But at the same time, we have to admit that our inner cities are vulnerable to such incidents, and that it's really hard to protect inner cities from such attacks. And what also strikes me is that larger Europe, not speaking about the European Union and Western Europe alone, but larger Europe seems to be united in the terror, in attempts of destabilizing public life. And of course, the governments, the states need to take actions to bring back stability and peace, and to make people believe that such things cannot happen at any time, anywhere, but that we come back to really stable situations, circumstances, as people, as citizens were used to 10 or 15 years ago, even 5 years ago.
And Dr. Rothfuss, Daniel in the studio here alongside Neil. Obviously, in light of these terror attacks, there's always a discussion that follows up, which is, could anything have been done to prevent this? Could things have been done differently? Even one death is too many, and certainly that's one side of the argument. But in terms of lone wolf attacks, and this is increasingly looking like a lone wolf attack, initially reports of 3 attackers, that's now been confirmed down to 1. Just how possible is it for the security services to do anything? I mean, the men who gave their lives today, preventing further civilian casualties, acted quickly enough, certainly. Could more have been done, though, do you think, or is these sorts of incidents, the risk of such incidents, has it just become a part of today's reality?
Well, we have to ask also for our political representatives when we ask for ways to make our public life safer again, because the security forces cannot solve problems that have been created long before by, let's say, if we look at the situation in Western Europe, by open border policies where we are not sure who has come in, who has penetrated our territory, and where often by smuggling, weapons have also reached to our countries. So this is a problem which you cannot solve by easy means as bringing more policemen to the streets or by doing more scrutinizing work for people who want to buy an arm, because those who commit such attacks, they usually get their weapons through dark channels on the black market or through smuggling from outside our territories. And so this problem is hard to solve with easy means and measures. It's a big question which needs to be debated in public and which needs to go really deep in analyzing the roots of such a deteriorating security situation.
Rainer, you mentioned there, I think you said that you feel that a lot of Western countries are united by the terrorist attacks against them. I just want to ask you, though, are they united in their efforts to tackle terrorism together? Because it seems like there are political divisions when it comes to fighting the terrorists. Are they united? And if they are, why have they not managed to defeat terrorism yet?
No, you're completely right. The division is politically made, but in the problem of the terrorist attacks that cities just as much as London, Paris, Brussels, Berlin, and Moscow face together, we are united. And in the consequence, we should also unite politically and bridge this divide, which is politically made between, let's say, East and West Russia and the European Union, because we both face the same problems. And intelligence service of the Russian state has already helped also to prevent security breaches, terror attacks in the West. And vice versa, also Western intelligence services could well help also the Russian government. So I think in this respect, we should work more closely together. But if we look at the situation right now, we are divided, and this should not be accepted. Some of the security attacks or threats that Europe has been facing in the past years have emanated from the Middle East conflict in Iraq and Syria. And there the West and Russia was opposing each other instead of working together and solving the conflict there. So I think we need more unity. We need more collaboration on that field to face this great challenge of terrorism in our cities.
Rainer, I just want to pick up on what you said there. For example, Syria, one of the most obvious places where Islamic State were fighting against, well, all sorts of different countries were in there. America were present, Russia was there were Syrian national forces as well. When you've got this common enemy, why wasn't, for example, America and Russia united? They have a common enemy. Instead, there was all kinds of debate and argument over which different military factions were the enemy, who were the terrorists. Why wasn't it simpler?
I mean, if we look at the analysis that the Defense Intelligence Agency of the United States has made in 2012, we see that the agency has seen like a proxy war conflict going on in Syria and Iraq. And this means that it was not a conflict going on just on the local or even regional level, but it was supported by players from the outside. And the two different sides which were facing each other in Syria in this proxy war were, on the one hand side, Russia, China, and Iran backing the government of Syria, and on the other hand side, the Western allies and their friends in the Arabic countries and Northern African countries standing behind the opposition, the so-called opposition, which were terrorists, largely terrorist organizations. And this problem is now striking back also partly in Europe. But coming back to the attacks in Moscow, we cannot, of course, draw this conclusion now that it was a terrorist attack stemming from this conflict. But what we can draw as a conclusion is that we need really close cooperation to guarantee our security. And as much as Russia, also United States should contribute with intelligence, with information to prevent further attacks in our cities. And of course, we need to think about the roots, as I said before, because such terrorist attacks always show that to a certain level, the value system within a country is shaken, is being torn apart, because there are factions inside the society which do not stand behind a government, who want to destroy, who want to harm society. And this is the basic problem. And you cannot just face it by putting more policemen on the street or by deciding on new arms restrictions for civilians. This will not help. This will not solve the situation.
You talked there about proxy wars. Is it realistic, or is this a flight of fancy? Many of us will have heard, you know, the claims that certain countries are funding terrorism. They're supplying, providing monetary assistance to the likes of Islamic State. And one must wonder, how do they manage to compete with and seemingly survive against the strongest military forces in the world? Do you believe this, that terrorists are being funded, used as proxy agents from certain nations?
Well, of course, there are different proofs of that fact. I mean, we had the fact that the United States Congress under Obama has funded military programs inside Syria to train rebels, so-called rebels, who were used as an instrument to weaken the government of Syria. And we have also in the history different incidents where a clear proof was found afterwards, at least, that governments meddled in internal affairs of states where governments should be toppled. And of course, there are also many ways to disguise such measures, to channel funding or also weapon delivery through third countries or through charity organizations. There are different ways to disguise the support for terrorism, and it's a really alarming signal that we find these methods over and over again. So we know that this problem exists. We understand more or less the way how this support is being done, executed, but it seems that it will not stop so far. So more has to be done, that such bloody instruments as terrorism will never ever be used again in geopolitical conflicts to achieve goals of certain governments or of certain interest groups, because it is also very hard to educate the public about those hidden ways of doing world politics, geopolitics. And therefore, it's beyond the control of the citizens and of democratic institutions. And this is very worrisome.
Okay, my guest this hour is Rainer Rothfuss, who's a consultant and a geopolitical analyst. Good to speak to you, Rainer. Thank you so much.
It was my pleasure.
Back to Daniel Hawkins, who's in the studio with me. I believe we've got some updates in terms of latest information, number of people injured, and perhaps some more video footage coming in as well.
Yeah, that's right. We've obviously had the eyewitness videos coming in, you know, shaky footage on mobile phones of people running away, of gunfire in the background. We do have a video coming in, of course, unconfirmed as of yet, that we can show you now, that allegedly shows the moment the attacker was neutralised by security forces. This is it. Well, this video appears to be filmed on a mobile handheld device. It does show a figure in a building. It's showing the man is holding something that is resembling an automatic assault rifle. There are shots that can be heard, tracer bullets, as you can see right there, little bright sparks flying from the left-hand side of the screen. Before he falls down. There was eyewitness accounts. There was talking in the background of the video, which we can't bring you right now for technical reasons, but people are saying they saw security personnel, snipers, to the left of that video. We'll probably show you the full video a bit later on, in an exchange of gunfire with this attacker. He does appear to be wearing, it is hard to make out, of course, in this grainy, shaky footage, he does appear to be wearing some sort of combat camouflage fatigues. He's got something on his back. His face is covered, his head is covered, and he's holding a rifle before he is shot dead. And you can see bullets, tracer rounds there flying in from the left-hand side of the screen. We're possibly going to show the full video a little bit later on, of course, of security forces on the left appearing to be neutralising the attacker. That is the video coming in, unconfirmed as of yet officially if this is the case, but certainly looks like it's taken from the scene, and certainly seems to show the moment of the attacker being shot dead there.
Like you said, it appears to be handheld, judging by the slightly shaky nature of the movement, which the first thing that strikes me is it's just remarkable how people, regardless of how much danger they're in, will often first instinct is reach for a recording device. Incredible, although it does help to shed light afterwards. Just incredible that people will do that.
Absolutely, absolutely amazing. I mean, this the footage, as we can see from that video, could be more than 10-15 metres away. Very much in the line of sight of that attacker, very much within range of any firearm, let alone a Kalashnikov assault rifle there. Yet there we go. It's the social media age. It's the age where anybody can be a citizen journalist, can bring in videos, and that is what we have had.
Although, again, whilst if that turns out to be true, if it is verified, as for every one that does turn out to be accurate, the contribution from people who are standing by can be misleading. And often the information you get from people who are in close proximity, let's call them witnesses, it can lead to a lot of confusion, hence the belief at the beginning of, 3 hours ago, that we were talking about 3 potential assailants and multiple people killed. And in that panic of people hearing bullets and screaming and seeing people in security outfits, very hard to establish the facts. But we're getting a slightly clearer picture now, aren't we, in terms of how many people are reported to have been injured?
We are, yes. Ministry of Health confirming 5 injuries at the scene, 5 people being treated. Witness accounts saying that the ambulance workers who came to the scene also put themselves in danger, trying to get those who were shot by the attacker to hospital to treatment as soon as possible. Now, out of those 5, we can't say for certain how many of those are civilians, how many are